Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality and is about discovering your place in this great universe from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guest, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight we are going to be talking about story, history, where our ancestral lineage has been, many of our soul fragments, how we're now coming to being, and knowing where we have been and how life plays out century to century and through the days of our lives. What is story all about? Story is our experiences. We can change it. We can shape-shift it. We can make it be what it needs to be. Especially once the experience has happened, we can now say, let's look back at it with the eyes of today. It becomes a different story. We look back at it just from yesterday. It's definitely a different story. And we look back at it in the moment and we say, is this real? And all we can do is experience. What we'll be talking about today is about a story over time in the early 1900s. Many times on this show, we've spoken about this before, and we said, truly, look back at our ancestors. Look back at what's going on in their life at that time. Look back and see, sense, and feel from that time period versus from the year 2024, looking back at their time and their life and saying, oh, they are so sad for them. We are so angry for them. We want to divest of them. Oh, why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? They were powerful. They were powerless. It's truly about being able to say, can we respect and honor every single one of us, every single soul within this human time, and say we are all doing the best we can within that moment of time. Today, my guest is Geri Spieler. Her book is Regina of Warsaw, Love, Loss, and Liberation. Geri, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this greatly. Thank you.
I'm so glad to have you, Geri, and I think just as I just shared, your book is all about a story through history and time, and we look at it and we say, wow, it's a wonderful story. And many of us can say, my ancestors have been there, and I didn't know anything about it. Was that the purpose, maybe, of writing this book?
Yes, I wanted to reach out and share my grandmother's story. Over the years, certainly I've known her story all my life. I've talked about her, and I talked about my mother and her sisters being raised in a Jewish orphanage in Los Angeles, which takes us back to why were they there? And the book is, the genre is called historical fiction. The history is accurate. The fiction are the conversations and some of the relationships, the glue that pulls the story together. And my grandmother was a very tough woman. I remember when I was a little girl, and of course I've known her story, but something clicked in me to say, why now? Why write her book now? And I think it's the sign of the times that the racism and the violence that's going on really raised this up for me.
You know, I think it's very important to note about that, too. You say about why this time, because so many times people in this year, actually, it's really in this century it's going to be, is that people are looking back at soul fragments. Where have we been? What have we traversed through? And how can we heal each other as our souls will heal forward? I think that's so vitally important because when we share our story, just as you say about the glue, it's about being able to say, take the story and feel it within the present moment. When you read your book, Regina of Warsaw, you can feel where they were in those times. You feel danger. You feel love. You feel grief. You feel fear. I mean, there's fear written on almost every single page, you know. But you also hear and feel a story of resilience, of getting up every day, of moving through things. We all have that. It's how did we do it? What do the signs on our pathway look like? And how did we make it through? Isn't that what we're all talking about, no matter what year or decade we've grown up in?
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, for her, a lot of the heightened fear happened when she and her sister witnessed a pogrom, which is a Russian word for a violent raid. And this, in 1906, this happened in the city of Bialystok. And Regina was there with her sister and witnessed this horror against her and her people. And she carried that back, to Warsaw with her, and was much more heightened to any of violence and anti-Semitism than the people around her who hadn't witnessed that event, but it was going on. And it drove her life for the rest of her life on how she behaved, in terms of what was coming up against her, what she was trying to warn her family about, that they couldn't see the same way that she saw it.
Mm-hmm. Don't you think also, too, you tend to, when you see these things, I know, as I've shared on the radio before, once you see something, you cannot unsee it. You truly can't.
Yeah.
I mean, that core template is there. However you want to dress it up becomes the story. But that core template is there. So she may have shared her story over decades and over her lifetime and maybe shape-shifted it a little bit to be able to fit the people she was sharing it with. However, if you look back at the core template, you hold people, places, and things very close to your core. I remember my ancestors also from Poland, Lithuania, and Ireland, just in Scranton. All of them lived within 1 mile radius their entire existence. So for over 100 years, no one ever moved outside that mile radius because they believed that it held them together in safety and security. Isn't that truly what we're looking for, safety and security? And how does that story really get tested over time? I think Regina really got tested over time. Are you safe and secure? And she pretty much said, no, I'm not today. No, I'm not today. And she shows us how, right?
Yeah, I mean, she was a translator for something called the Jewish Labor Bund. It's a socialist organization that was all over Europe. And she would see the messages from town to town of what was happening, and then she would translate them into the local language for people to see. And she kept saying, things are getting worse. There's more violence. We need to protect ourselves. They even went to see the mayor of Warsaw to help him approve groups of, patrolling the neighborhoods to keep people safe. And nobody would listen. Yeah. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. You're overreacting. And her gut said, no, I'm not. Right. And like she says in the book, I didn't want to be proved right. But being right meant that there was death, that there was violence. But her gut, her soul, said, this isn't safe, and I can't raise my son in this environment. Yeah. And she took the baby and herself thousands of miles away, not knowing anyone, not knowing the language, because it was so meaningful to her to be safe. Her truth was believing in herself and saying it's not okay.
Let's think about that for a minute. We go back to the early 1900s, and people have left their countries. They were true immigrants. They just knew nothing else. And being that many were very literate, many had barely nothing in their pockets, many left with nothing but the clothes on their back. And if we think about that, we look back and we say, oh, they were such pioneers, they were this, that, and the other, and we all have labels for them. However, there were hundreds of thousands of others doing the very similar thing. So was there not a sense of taking care of each other? In other words, if someone falls, they're going to pick the next person up. There's this sense of, when you're an immigrant to a different country, someone's going to be there that will say, we got you. So do you think perhaps we may not have recognized that, and we find that, it must have been very hard, but we also can say, who were her comrades who were around her? Who were those who supported her? Who were those who said, we will not let you fall? Perhaps?
Yeah, the family had neighbors. I mean, Regina's family was Jewish, but there were a lot of Lipka Tatars, and Muslim community in her neighborhood that came together when they heard that Regina and her sister had been in Bialystok. And fortunately, they were not, physically hurt. One sister was, but survived, and they came together.
Yes.
It's time for us to be together and help each other and help this family whose husband got beaten up and now he was blind. We need to feed them. We need to care for them. It was very important, and the fear, unfortunately, drove them together, but apparently for the rest of the family, it wasn't enough, as it was for her sister, Chachafega, who also wanted to leave Poland and married a new rabbi who she knew was going to be stationed outside of Poland. And so that's why she married him. And Regina basically said, I'm leaving.
Yeah. I think also, too, to hold fast to the idea is that I know for myself, I've said it so many times over the decades, probably thousands of times, is that I don't see labels. I grew up this way. I came into the world this way. I don't see race or color or generation or age or gender. To me, when I connect with someone, it's on a deeper level, and it has nothing to do with that face value, so to speak. But I think also, too, Regina may have had some of that aspect within her also, because she just knew that she was on a deeper soul journey. In other words, she had something in her that was driving her that may have been influenced by what was going on around her, but she had a story within her that was going to play out and its importance. Don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what she did was remarkable. And what she believed is she believed in herself. She believed in her truth. And for whatever reason, the rest of the family and others didn't see what she saw at a deeper level.
Right.
And there was something, she was a tough little lady. She was 5'2", and fiery. She was not a lovey-dovey grandma.
Right.
She was obviously, she survived a lot of pain and hardship, but she survived it, and she survived it because she saw things, as you would say, Dr. Gallagher, on a deeper level.
Absolutely.
And that, and that allowed my mother to survive and for me to survive, to even be here. And so what did she pass down to her girls, to her children, that could also believe that deeper level of what I'm seeing is my truth?
Let's talk for a second, Geri, about the idea of, you wrote in your book, Education in Poland has a history of being tied to the Catholic Church. I can distinctly remember in the Scranton area, there were Catholic Church, there was one on every single block. I mean, within a mile, there had to be 20. It just was the way it was. It was different immigrants who had put up their own Catholic church. I remember playing the organ, singing the Latin Mass with a priest when I was in 4th grade, carrying that on, so to speak. So I think about it, when immigrants have come to the country, they brought their belief and their core belief with them, and that sometimes bumped up against, well, that was your church over there, but that's not the same church as over here. We see that quite often. I live in New Orleans, and it's very distinct. Here we accept everybody. But when I grew up in, Pennsylvania, the decades kind of like in the 70s and 80s, they were getting very, I think the time, I always liken it back to the time when they turned the priest around, he said the Mass in English, and they put a guitar up there. That was the end of the Catholic Church, because it was no longer a mystique. It was no longer something that you would hold deep in your heart and your soul. It was something that we had to rationalize and understanding. Now we're going, well, that kind of took that away. So I think the idea truly, when you write about Regina in your book, it's about understanding how people have different versions of the same story, of the same religion, or of the same location, and the same thing of time. Do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if your family was from Lithuania, it was different, than Poland or any part of Eastern Europe where there was a lot of violent activity happening. Right. And we saw millions of Eastern Europeans fleeing and coming to this country. But each one of them, the story was slightly different. And so each one had their own history and belief on what was happening in their country and why they needed to flee. And they each, as I said, had their own story.
It's so interesting what you just said, Regina. We talk about health and wellness on this show all the time, too. And I look back and knowing that an Eastern European ding to your DNA, so to speak, is called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. Many people are going, doesn't mean anything to me, I don't know what it's about. However, you could probably find out of a group of 100, better than 50% of them who have issues with their liver, with their lungs, with their pancreas. And that's what this does, is it ends up putting fibrosis in there. And what that means is, the way you relate it back as our shaman journey is that fear, gasp, you're gasping for breath. All of a sudden you just go, and you can't let it go. And it's all this pent-up anger in your liver. So if you look at it, many generations back had been exposed to so much fear, holding on to pent-up anger, not knowing how to express themselves. They ended up actually altering the way in which their health was, the way in which they had children, the way in which things have gone forward. So many of my patients are going, I don't know why this is. I don't know why I've got this. And the minute we do it, I'll ask them, where are you from? Eastern European. Where are your ancestors? They came here. We go, we're doing this. And it's so important, I think, to understand how our experiences can alter every aspect of our being. Just as Regina had the experience that altered every aspect of her being, how her children would be born and how they would live their lives and how they would tell the stories and how you now are sharing the story. These are all aspects that get altered, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting just for me and why I respond to certain things that others may not respond to.
Yes.
There's something in me that, I'll catch my breath because there's something that is not okay.
Right.
And other people won't see it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's like this deep imprint that we have somewhere. It imprints our health. It imprints our knowing somehow, some way. I mean, it takes on deja vu. How many of us say that was deja vu, I must have been here somehow, some way. I must have known this somehow, some way. It's not like I was taught it or it had it play out in the year, 1970 or 80 or 90. But somewhere we have a knowing. And I think, we've shared on the show is that that's so vitally important to bring out right now. I think your book is absolutely the most essential piece of work right now, Regina of Warsaw, because what it's telling us is wake up, feel what's in you, go back and find the stories, and help heal this lineage. Ancestral lineage healing right now is very big. And if you have that knowing, you're the one responsible to be able to do the line. Have you ever suggested or thought about that?
I've talked about, as I mentioned before, why people react suddenly without reason. That you're talking to someone that there's some sort of fear in you about this person, or there's something about the person that you're uncomfortable with, and you don't know that person's background and who their ancestors were and why you have this negative reaction to this person. Because a lot of people came to this country over the years, certainly after World War II, we had a lot of influx of Nazis into this country. Right. And I don't want to paint somebody's generation now for what their ancestors did then.
Correct. Yeah.
But there could be something there. When I'm reading or in movies, there's this instant reaction to this. Brief story. I lived in Washington, D.C., and the Holocaust Museum opened, and a good friend of mine from Los Angeles came to visit me, and we went to the opening of this museum. In the lobby, there was a wall photograph of the Kindertransport, and these were German kids that were sent to England, and they were on a train. And she walked into that lobby, and she froze, and she pointed. She said, "See that little girl? That's me."
Wow.
And it was, and so she had her own issues, but right then and there, it was right in her face, because I remember, she was from, I thought she was from London, but she was initially from Germany, and she was on the Kindertransport, and so her feelings, and I remember her always being a little bit on edge sometimes, and I understand why.
Yeah. We have the World War II Museum here in New Orleans, and they always like, oh, let's go down there. And I'm like, no. I'd be happy to say, see you later, and I'm not going. It just doesn't resonate with me. It just, there's no way. You know what I mean? It just doesn't. I am the type who, any type of violence or any of that type sort, I need to be the observer. I cannot be the engager. I can't be within that space. And it is so profound. And then people would say, well, you're not standing up for yourself. And I'm like, absolutely not. I'm standing up for myself because I'm caring for myself. And somewhere I've been, then they say, oh, you were damaged somehow. And the damage somehow doesn't always have to be us in our reality. It just as you and I have both shared, it can be through our lineage. The damage came in, and we are now breathing a sigh of letting it be exposed and letting the stories come out. So we are now feeling those feelings of that experience. Isn't that what many can find when they read your book? They are feeling the feelings of the experiences? I think if they allow themselves to feel that, if they engage with what was going on with Regina in terms of not just, leaving Europe, but her heartbreak going forward and her strength, saying after Grandpa abandoned her, well, if I have to be poor, at least I don't have to be cold. Right. And, and I think the thing for me in finally accepting this, because she's been my grandmother my whole life, there were years I didn't like her because she was tough and she wasn't lovey-dovey and, and she was just surviving her life, recognizing this woman is why I exist. Yeah. Her history, her strength, her belief in what she saw as true is why I'm telling her story. And so how is that passed down? My mother and my mother's strength and willingness to do what she needed to do to survive and passing that on, genealogically, I think, is real. Yeah. Absolutely. I think also, too, Geri, the idea of what has happened in the past definitely comes full circle. I know within my own family, there is a saint, and he is on the Polish-Lithuanian side. He was the Bishop of Vilnius, in the late 1918, and he also started the Sisters of the Immaculate Conception. I remember distinctly, the school that I went to for grade school, well, actually all of it, was right next door to the convent, and it was the Sisters of Immaculate Conception. It was right there. So it was keeping it going forward, so to speak. And his work was, he really did things in secret to heal people in secret. And I look at my own life, I'm 70 now, but I distinctly remember being a naturopathic doctor, and I came back to Louisiana, where I had been, And I started getting death threats and everything, and I said, oh, I need to go and I need to retreat. And I did it in secret. And I'm thinking, and then took me about maybe a decade or two to realize that his imprint was the imprint that I was also playing out. Don't you think if we truly sat down and looked at some of their stories, we would see these imprints within maybe family members or whatever, or we would see, wow, how that's played out. Don't you think?
Absolutely. Yes. I think that we all have, whatever your history is, wherever your family came from. We're a country of immigrants. Yes. So most people can trace back at some point from other parts of the world and why they left there to come here, whether it's Africa or South America or, anywhere. What was the incident that drove people away, and how did that imprint them here? Right. And what, going forward. So if your family maybe was from Russia or, maybe they were from South America someplace or Africa or whatever that voluntarily came here. But even those who didn't voluntarily come here, the slaves have been imprinted on their history and what happened to their families.
Right. I liken it back. I think I had a show several weeks ago, and I was saying about the endless mountains in Pennsylvania and how I can sit with them and, just leave me there and go away and don't ever come back, just bring food, that kind of idea. I'm just so entrenched in that. And the guest was from Ireland, and they said, well, the mountains that are in Ireland is the same exact chain as the mountains in Scranton and in the Endless Mountains. It's just when it broke apart and the continent split. And I went, oh. So that's why a lot of the immigrants from Eastern European stayed within the Northeast, because it was the very same thing. It was already part of their, in other words, the place in which they landed. It's just when the continent split, then they felt the water between them. Isn't that interesting to note?
Yeah, that's a geographic connection then. That's really interesting. Huh. Yeah. My family, my father was from New Jersey. And of course, my mother was born in Chicago. But they met in Los Angeles. And my father's father died, and he had to go to work. So he had a life similar to my mom's, where there was a link that was broken someplace. And it drew them together because they both had sort of a shared history that made them understand each other better. And I thought that was very interesting on a more recent issue of how they connected.
I think don't you think sometimes over the decades that people have connected through fear or through grief? For sure. I think a shared pain allows you to understand someone else's pain, and that can drive you together because you share that kind of intimacy. Yeah, because you wrote in your book, Geri, you said, if life is peaceful and Morris pays the bills, I can forget the rest. Where would I go if I left? I have no choice but to stay. And I can honestly tell you, I've had experience with this. Many of the women who were married in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they stayed with their husbands till death do you part kind of idea, because that is what was ingrained in them from before. So there was no way they were going to leave. Don't you think?
Exactly. No, so the divorce was something that I remember my mother, you whispered. It was a terrible thing if you were a divorced woman. And it was, women didn't have the support or the means to take care of themselves as until they started more going to college and having more independence, and things changed. But my grandmother had nothing. Her skills were not useful because her English wasn't good enough. She couldn't really have supported herself and 4 little children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's also, Geri, talk about the idea of skills and of trades, because, many times people will say, well, I don't know why, but now I want to be a farmer, Well, many of your ancestors have been farmers. It's just that there was this lack of something in between where we all thought literacy was better and it was going to save us, kind of idea.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
I think the idea of going back into trades is very profound right now, and that's doing a lot of soul healing for people. They are saying, I want to grow my own food. I want to be able to feel more in control of what I'm exposed to. I want to grow flowers. It could be anything. Or you want to make shoes. We buy these things in the store. They're made out of rubber, and we're going, I don't know why my feet hurt. Well, you're allergic to the rubber, But they want to get back into trades, and they want to be able to touch, feel, and see the earth around us. And I think that's so vitally important in this comment is that we want to touch, feel the earth is around us because that is what has nurtured us and kept us safe. In other words, when the immigrants came over, it was a soft place to land. The earth provided a soft place to land. And that is such a vital importance to everyone's existence. Yet we are so disconnected from that story. Perhaps?
I think for Regina and her family, her brother Zelman wanted to be a farmer. He wanted to raise, dairy cows and make cheese. But I think people wanting to connect more now than ever because we're looking at what's happening to our food and how it's being created and what we're eating. And, more people having chickens and fruit trees and vegetables and things. There's certainly a larger movement of that because of our environment as being so challenged today.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what? I look back on it and all of my ancestors, all of the women, they were some sort of sewing kind of thing. They worked at the lace mill, that was in Scranton. And I would go to my aunt's house and there was material everywhere. I mean, as soon as you hit the front door, there was material and sewing in the middle of her. She didn't have a kitchen table. It was 10 sewing machines, But she was very much into that, and she very much was connected to that. And then we've kind of lost that. People don't sew that much anymore. It's sort of like, I'll get something from China, I'll wear it for a little while and throw it out. Even with my grandkids, I said, well, let's learn. I'll teach you how to sew. And they'll say, why do you do that? I have a hole in my dress. We're just throwing it away. And I'm going, oh, okay. So I think that the idea is, are we trying to get back, or are we really just putting on a facade, so to speak?
I think for some people, they want to get back, but not for everyone. I mean, we've grown up in a society where things break and we throw them away. We don't fix them. There is some movement where they have once a month everybody brings their toaster or whatever, and people fix it. But it's not. It's a free cycle organization where you recycle everything. Is not as big as it could be. Also, I think it depends on where you live in the country and the people who surround you, and their lifestyle. What have you embraced? If I have a neighbor, might introduce me to this whole concept of fixing what's broken as opposed to throwing it out.
Right.
But it's not everywhere.
But also, too, what you just said, Geri, is so vitally important. Fix what's broken. Isn't that the whole concept of your book? When you're healing hearts, you're fixing what's broken.
Well, she certainly reached for that.
Right.
On her own, she was not going to be a victim.
Yes.
Regina refused to be a victim. And she tried to get other people to, understand what she was seeing and not be a victim. And Grandma was tough when she got to Los Angeles, and they put her 3 girls in a Jewish orphanage. It was very tough for her, but she knew that that's how they would get their food and that would be safe and they would have their medicine and they would be very well taken care of. When I told people my mother was raised in an orphanage, they said, oh, my God, that must have been horrible.
Right.
And I said, no. She, for her life, said that they were so lucky to be there, that they were so well taken care of, and that she had to give back. My mother said her whole life, you have a good life, you have a roof over your head and food, you need to give back. She wanted to give back. She said, I was given so much I have an obligation to return. And she volunteered for many organizations, even though she worked full-time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a legacy that my grandmother passed on to her daughter and her granddaughters.
I also think, too, Geri, that it's so vitally important to recognize it in our life. Who are the shapeshifters? How have they come about? And can we, as you say, learn from them? I know for my own self, all of the ancestors never divorced, never did, went through their decades, beaten, abused, broken, whatever, never ever healed. Myself, I was the first one to go to college. I was the first one to get a divorce. I was the first one to be kicked out, blah, 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 all the way up. However, I had a voice in a sense that I knew that things were temporary and I was to move to the next space and time. In other words, can we see how Regina in the book, she was in different spaces and times for short periods, learn, do what she needed to do, and then go to the next thing. In other words, with her children, and when she lived in Europe and then she went to America, it was time. This was done. That door was closed. We go to the next one,
Mm-hmm.
And to say, just as you said, when people said, oh, that's such a hard thing, people said to me, oh, I'm so sorry for your suffering. What, Geri, one day I had to look up, I Googled the word suffering, what does it mean? Because I really didn't know what it meant because I've never experienced it, So I think the idea is just as you shared, with your character in the book is that we go through these things. We're not victims of it. We aren't suffering through it. We are experiencing it. That's what you wanted to get across in your book. These are her experiences and how she walked through life. Isn't that the core of what we want to leave behind?
Yeah, I think to try and learn from that, it's always tough when you tell kids, learn from my experience, and all they do is roll their eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But one of the things she did pass on to her daughters is you have to be able to take care of yourself. You can't count on anyone else. You can't count on a man to take care of you. And she told her daughters that, and the orphanage also said to the girls as well as the boys, you can't just graduate from high school and go out. You have to have a trade or go to college. Now, back then, it was very difficult to go to college. Some of the boys got scholarships, but the girls were given choices of you need to learn a trade. You can become a secretary. You can go to secretarial school. That's what my mother did.
Right.
My Aunt Jo was very talented. She went to beauty school. She worked at the movie studios as a beautician. My other aunt was great in math. She went to real estate school. So the message was, Grandma didn't have any saleable skills. She was a translator. So she finally got a job at a bakery. And she made some money there. She could support herself and the one boy, but she couldn't support the other three girls. But the girls learned a trade. They could take care of themselves, whether there was a man in their life or not. Mm-hmm. You need to be able to stand on your own 2 feet and not depend on other people to take care of you. Because obviously that didn't happen for Regina.
Yeah. Also, too, in closing, I want to touch on one thing that you said in your book, Geri, and it says, why is life always a fight? And when I think about that, I know for my own self, I know for my ancestors, I always say, there's a certain one that's going to be the leader. You got to have the sickle and you got to go through the forest,
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no other way you could bring everybody else along. So I think in essence, a lot of these immigrants that had come from Europe, they came over. It was time for them to have the sickle and say, we've got to make it work. We don't know how. And be able to have lineages that can now reflect and see that. So you, by writing your book, she has now served the purpose of saying, having you stand there and say, I can see clearly your story. I can see clearly how we've evolved. And I can see clearly why it's so vitally important to share our stories of our ancestors. Perhaps. Yeah,
I think that it's a cautionary tale and it's a learning story about what you can do to survive by telling Regina's story and what, she did do with her own little body and her own little gut of not being a victim and listening to her truth. And I think that's what I really wanted to get across to women is believe in yourself. Believe in what you're feeling. It's a message. Something's there. Something's wrong. You need to do something about it.
Yeah. It definitely is a story in which we all triumph. Just as you shared, you wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for her. So,
yep.
I think we have to give honor and respect to their stories, regardless of what we believe about it, regardless of what we think or judge about it, and regardless of how we even want to tell it again. We must have respect and honor for them for being here.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think so.
Yeah, I think that's very true, in your book, Geri, is about having respect and honor. And I think you have other works. Could you share with the listeners how to find out more information about your work?
Well, my first book is nonfiction, and it's called Housewife Assassin, the Woman Who Tried to Kill President Ford, and it's about Sarah Jane Moore, who shot at President Ford in front of the St. Francis Hotel in 1975 and missed his head by 6 inches. And that was not in the press. It's also been optioned for a movie. Hopefully it'll come out. Sarah Jane was 45 years old. She was a doctor's wife. She was a mother. She lived in a fancy country club community called Danville in Northern California. And she decided with other people that we needed a revolution, and so she shot at Ford. And the book is creative nonfiction. So it's nonfiction, but it's written like a novel. The second book is San Francisco Values, I wrote with my husband, and it's basically rebooting the quest to say that San Francisco has bad values. No, we don't. We have wonderful values. And then this third book is Regina of Warsaw. And then I have another book that will be coming out, which is called Revenge of the Sisters, about her 3 girls. So that's my book work. And then I write on Medium, and I do a lot of freelance writing. I've written for the Huffington Post. So that's what I do. Those are the things that I love, that are my passion in life.
Very good. Well, Geri, sorry. Now, see how I just said that? Our connection is already done. She has been speaking through this whole time, right?
Yes, she certainly has.
Absolutely. Well, Geri, it was such a pleasure to have you with us today. We thank you so much for joining, because I think it's so vitally important to be able to reflect, but just to be able to, as we said, respect. So we thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was absolutely delightful. I appreciate it. Thank you again.
If you'd like to find out more information about Geri Spieler, again, the book is Regina of Warsaw, Love, Loss, and Liberation. Please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page to go directly to her work for more information. And it is about being able to say, how did I get here? What is it all about? Can I find respect and honor for those who have gone before? And what am I carrying on in the legacy? We thank you so much for joining us today, for being here, because without them, we would not be. Have a great day. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher, and until tomorrow, have a wonderful time.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit drjeanettegallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.